Wonderful, wonderful. Well, my name is Dominic Torres. I'm the chair for the Satellite Rotary Club of the Military Family Support. Sorry to jump on sooner, but one of the veterans that I've been working with, that is a Vietnam veteran, got 100% today, but it was dated back to February. Took a little bit. He had no idea. I just had a conversation with his daughter. 2 years ago we started, and now he's at 100%. I'm so excited right now. So, I mean, if that's not one of the things we're fighting for, I'm so happy to see it. With that said, all right, folks, we're here today. We have about 8 different people here. That's fun. Today, our big guest, well, I don't know, I can't see Val, but Glenn, Isabel, and we got Raymond. Perfect. We're all in here today, and our guest, we've already said his name a few times, but we'll jump in one more time. Robin Bartlett, is that how you say it?
Bartlett.
Bartlett. Okay, fantastic. Raymond has written this fantastic, very lengthy piece on you. I would love to read it, but man, oh man, I think I'll take a lot of your thunder if I read it all out. So with that said, I will make it really, really simple and say that our speaker today was with, it looks like Charlie Alpha, the helicopter combat assault in Vietnam as the first lieutenant, 1st Platoon A Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry, 1st Cavalry Division. It says Airmobile. Yeah, perfect. And sir, you already have it primed up, so I would hate for it to fall off. So go right ahead.
So you ready for me to begin, or are you going to have something else?
Yes, sir. I there was a little bit of a problem there in the beginning, so I'd like to see it if it's already here. Let's go ahead and get it started before it disappears.
So you can see my screen okay?
Yes, sir.
Well, just as a little bit of background, I come from a military family. My grandfather went to West Point. My father went to West Point. My brother went to West Point. And I turned down an appointment to West Point. I attended 13 elementary and middle schools, 4 different high schools. And when I went to college at Claremont McKenna College in Southern California, I said, you know what? I've had enough of this military life and didn't want to follow the family footsteps to West Point. So I turned down the appointment. But it was the beginning of the Vietnam War, and the war was building, and classmates, myself included, were receiving draft notices during the summer months. So I knew that I needed to serve my obligation as an officer, and I didn't want to be drafted. So I joined my ROTC program, and at the end of 4 years, graduating with a degree, being brilliant as I was at the age of 21, I volunteered. I was a distinguished military graduate, and I volunteered for Airborne Ranger, an assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division, and I got everything that I asked for. Now, this next slide is a video, and I'm sorry, it looks like we're having a lot of trouble getting the music to play, but I'll try and just show you a little bit about what a helicopter combat assault looks like.
We can hear the music on our end, sir.
You can hear music?
Yes, sir.
It's working?
Yep. Yes, sir.
This is my badass photograph.
I was a combat infantry platoon leader engaged in helicopter combat assaults, search and destroy missions, and firefights with the 1st Cav Division Airmobile at the height of the Vietnam War from 1968 to 1969. I was assigned as the 1st platoon leader, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment. I spent 7 months in the field leading my platoon of 28 to 32 men. At 22, I was the 2nd oldest man in my unit. We conducted search and destroy missions in I Corps, parallel to the DMZ, from the Gulf of Tonkin on the east to the Laotian border on the west. The terrain was a mix of sand and tumbleweed to 3-canopy jungle, dictating the tactics and formations we used. The Cav had more helicopters than all other divisions in Vietnam combined. The Airmobile concept was originated during the Vietnam War and was designed to bring fresh fighting forces to the battlefield by helicopter assault. My unit also received priority support from artillery, Cobra helicopter gunships, and medevac during a firefight. This is what Three Canopy Jungle looks like near the Laotian border. We had to cut our way through a mass of wait-a-minute vines, bamboo, and thorns. The humidity and heat were always oppressive. Sweat poured off, and heat stroke and heat exhaustion were always a real problem. My platoon was strung out, single file, along the trail, and the men tended to bunch up. This is the worst possible formation, and ambush is always a real possibility. It was impossible to see more than 5 to 10 meters to the front. Booby traps of various types were a frequent cause of injury. Under these circumstances, it was easy to lose focus and suffer casualties. If one of my men was wounded or collapsed due to heat exhaustion in the deep jungle, he has to be evacuated via jungle penetrator. There were no GPS in those days, and helicopter pilots had to find us based on map coordinates. If we popped smoke, it would hang up in the jungle canopy. To be located, we had to cut down trees using machetes and open a 10 to 12 foot hole. We tied a smoke grenade to the end of a long pole and held it up as high as possible to allow the smoke to penetrate the canopy. We also fired star clusters, similar to Roman candles, through the open hole and hoped that pilots or door gunners would spot us, come over, and drop the hook. Firefights were always frightening and confusing. Often, the jungle was so dense I could not see the enemy shooting at us. Returning fire, we had to be cautious of where the other men were located. Night firefights were the worst. It was impossible to know what was happening. I lay on the ground, trying to direct fire at an enemy I could not see. I called for artillery support, not knowing exactly where I was on the ground and adjusting the rounds by listening to where they landed, praying they did not land on top of me. I was afraid to move, afraid to be shot, afraid to die. But I knew I had to move, make decisions, and give orders. I had to give the order to attack, and sometimes that cost lives. Somehow, I reached deep into my reserve, followed my training, found courage, and a way to overcome. The famous actor John Wayne said it best: "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." When it was over, I had nothing left in my tank. Exhaustion claimed our bodies as the adrenaline drained. I called for a medevac, took care of the wounded, and wrapped the dead in their ponchos. This photo was taken on my first worst day in Vietnam. It was the day when I lost my first killed in action, KIA. My job as the platoon leader was to fill out a 3x5 death card recording the coordinates where the soldier had been killed. I attached the card to his boot along with a dog tag and secured the poncho around him. A helicopter came in and we put the man on board for his long journey home. There would be more KIAs during my tour, and more men wrapped in ponchos, but this was my first.
So just as a quick aside, I want you to understand that this is not a 10,000 foot view. This is not a 50,000 foot view. This is a boots on the ground view. That's my perspective. And it began here at my college, Claremont McKenna College in Claremont, California. And that's me right there in the middle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left on the first row. I was a distinguished military graduate, and at the time I considered myself a pretty tough guy. I found out as time went on that I wasn't quite as tough as I thought I was. So my first assignment was to the 82nd Airborne Division. I was there for a couple of months and then assigned orders to Fort Benning, Georgia. All the names of these forts, of course, have now been changed. They've Fort Bragg, North Carolina is Fort Liberty, and Fort Benning, Georgia is Fort Moore, named after Hal Moore, famous Vietnam combat officer, now a general. And the movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, was his story. So the airborne course was 4 weeks long. And in the third week, the very last class was the one that nobody fell asleep in. And that was the parachute malfunction course. Everyone wanted to make sure they understood all the details of parachute malfunction. In the 4th week, we made 4 jumps, and if you completed those 4 jumps, then you received your airborne wings. After jump school, I went to infantry officers basic course, which was a 9-week course, a basic infantry course, and I went through that course with the graduating course from West Point, the infantry graduates, the officers who had elected to go infantry from West Point. It was really second nature to them. And the West Pointers, the ring knockers, that was a typical term that we used to call West Pointers because they always wore their class rings. And when they stood at the podium, they would always knock on the wood. And that's where they got the term ring knockers. They stuck to themselves. They obviously knew each other, and the infantry officer basic course was nothing for them, and they had that training many times over. It was to some extent a refresher for ROTC graduates. The following the infantry officer basic course came Ranger School, and Ranger School was supposed to be 9 weeks. And it was the most arduous training, and still is the best training, infantry training, that the Army has available. And it is very, very challenging. The object of the school and of the training is to take you to the point of physical and mental exhaustion. And when you reach that point, you are placed in charge of the patrol to lead the operation. There is one other major factor, a part of Ranger School, which is the buddy rating. Everyone had a buddy, Ranger buddy. And by the way, there was no insignia. There were non-commissioned officers going through, officers, mostly lieutenants, because at that time, every infantry officer was required to go through Ranger School. So we were just addressed as Ranger and then your last name. As I mentioned, the West Pointers stuck together, and at the end of each phase, there were 3 phases of the training. The physical fitness training at Fort Benning, then there was a mountain phase where you did rappelling and learned how to work with knots and ropes, and then the 3rd phase in Georgia, in the swamps, as this picture denotes. At the end of each phase, there was a buddy rating, and I found at the end of the first phase that I was in danger of failing the course because the West Pointers who were in my squad didn't take to ROTC graduates, and I was fortunate in that I came down with bronchial pneumonia and had to be recycled to the next class, which was the artillery class. And they were not quite as gung-ho as the infantry class from West Point. And I had a week or week and a half in the mountain phase, and so I knew when to volunteer and when not. So after Ranger School, which frankly was the very best insurance policy that any officer could have for surviving Vietnam. And I went back to my unit at the 82nd Airborne Division, made a number of jumps. I made a total of 82 jumps. Every officer had to jump at least once a month in order to maintain your airborne status. And it was not uncommon to jump 2 or 3 times a month for various different exercises. And after 6 months, I received orders. I knew where I was going. I received orders for the 101st Airborne Division, and about 30 days later, I was at Travis Air Force Base, just north of San Francisco, in between San Francisco and Sacramento. You're probably familiar with it, and on orders to go to the 101st Airborne Division. I arrived in Vietnam on May the 9th, 1968, and this was the build-up to the height of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. And the interesting thing was, I went to Vietnam on May the 9th, 1968, and somehow I returned on May the 9th, 1969, 365 days to the day, which was really quite unusual. And my wife's birthday is May the 9th, and my youngest son's birthday is May the 9th. And I want you to know that I have played 5-9 in every possible combination, and I have never won a thing. So, but I was happy to come home from Vietnam. So here I am in Bien Hoa at the replacement station. And upon arrival, because it was just after the Tet Offensive of 1968, which was the major turning point in the war for the United States. And they told me that all orders were canceled for officers because there had been so many casualties. All orders were canceled. And about 3 days later, I was assigned to the 1st Cavalry Division. The good news was as I mentioned in the video, there were more helicopters in the 1st Cav Division than in all of Vietnam. The bad news was, and this allowed us to carry lighter packs. My pack was about 45 pounds. We carried more water, more ammunition. Other colleagues of mine, other officers, were typically carrying 65, 70-pound packs by comparison. So we got helicopter support on a daily basis. They brought us food, they brought us water, they brought us additional ammunition, and that was one of the big advantages. Now, I mentioned that the Tet Offensive of 1968, that occurred in December 1968. That was really a turning point for the American public in the United States, because up until that point in time, Westmoreland and President Johnson all said we were winning the war. And over the Tet Offensive, the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong attacked more than 200 cities in South Vietnam, and were able to actually capture several of the cities. Now, Americans lost about 2,000 men in that ordeal. South Vietnamese soldiers lost about 4,000, and NVA and Viet Cong lost 80,000. So we more than destroyed this initiative, but psychologically, the North Vietnam was successful in changing the American public opinion about the war. And Walter Cronkite, the voice of America, really established with a final broadcast the statement that, in his opinion, the most that we could hope for was a draw, and that pretty much turned the public opinion of the time, and the protest movement in the United States, while it was happening at that time, really escalated. Now, understand that we were in South Vietnam. We had no news sources. We had no television. We were totally for the most part, soldiers were totally unaware of the protest movement that was going on in the United States, unless somebody happened to receive a newspaper. Of course, as replacement troops came in over the years, they brought with them, stories from back home. But for the most part, at that point in time, the height of the Vietnam War, American soldiers were ignorant of what was going on in the United States. So here I am at, first I was sent to An Khê in 3 Corps. That was the division rear of the 1st Cavalry Division. And then we moved up to I Corps along the demilitarized zone. And we had about a 3 or 4 day acclimatization. The average temperature was between 100, 105, sometimes 110, especially if you were in the jungle. And you got very, very used to no underwear and being quite dirty on a regular basis. I was assigned eventually to A Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, and was choppered out to my unit, and went in to see the battalion commander about 8 o'clock at night with 3 other officers. 4 officers went into his bunker together. And here is the lieutenant colonel, our battalion commander. He was exhausted. He was dead on his feet. I don't think he'd slept in about 3 days. And he gave us a 2-minute pep talk. I don't remember a thing that he said. And we went in alphabetical order. So I went in first. And then he said to the S1, who is the personnel officer of the unit, where do we need these officers? And the S1 said, well, we need 1 in A, 2 in B, and 1 in C. So he just pointed at me, the first one in line, you go to A, the next 2 to B, and the fourth one to C. I was the only officer to survive my tour. The other 3 officers were either killed or wounded. Now, I met with the S1 during that period of time, and I let him know that my secondary specialty was also as an S1. I was an adjutant in the 82nd Airborne Division. And he said, well, that's great because you'll be coming out of the field. An officer only serves 6 to 7 months in the field, and then you go to a staff job. And he said, you'll be coming out of the field about the same time that I'll be going back to the United States. And if you survive your tour, we'll make you the adjutant. That was my introduction to my battalion and then ultimately to my company. This is my platoon. I averaged 28 to 32 men, depending upon casualties and illness and men going on R&R. They were 90% draftees, but they were all very, very good soldiers. Average age, 19 years of age. It was my command group. I'm on the man here on the left was my platoon sergeant. These 2 men in the middle were radio operators. This young, slimmer guy was my radio operator. This was the platoon sergeant's radio operator. This is me. That's my badass photograph. And this is our medic down here at the bottom. And I wanted to mention that the platoon sergeant here is normally the most experienced man in the unit. It's not uncommon to have a platoon sergeant have 10 years of experience. But my platoon sergeant had gone through a special course at Fort Benning, Georgia, called the Instant NCO course, and he came out as a platoon sergeant. He had his 19th birthday in Vietnam. So he and I had pretty much the same level of experience. My radio operator, always within arm's reach, weighed in at about 135, 140 pounds. He was just as tough as nails. And I'll show you a picture a little later on he carried a very, very heavy pack because he had the radio and all the same equipment that we had, but he also supported the radio, 2 batteries, smoke grenades, star clusters. He was a pack mule for sure. And you can see the antenna sticking up behind his back there. Here's another short video.
Follow me in this video to see what it was like to make a helicopter combat assault and be in a firefight in Vietnam. The 1st Cavalry Division had more helicopters than any other division in Vietnam. The idea behind the Airmobile concept was to bring fresh fighting forces directly to the battle by helicopter. In a firefight, our units also received immediate support from artillery, Cobra helicopter gunships, and medevac. I was assigned as the 1st platoon leader, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cav Division Airmobile, at the height of the war from 1968 to 1969. I spent 7 months leading 28 men on helicopter assaults and search and destroy missions parallel to the DMZ and I Corps. This was my view as the platoon leader during a helicopter combat assault. I made more than 50 assaults, sometimes twice a day. I always rode in the first helicopter when it was my platoon's turn to lead the assault. The landing zone, or LZ, was chosen to be as close to the enemy force as possible. The assault was designed to engage the enemy so that the Cavs' firepower could be brought to bear. This included naval gun bombardment, jets dropping CS gas and napalm, artillery, Cobra helicopters, and additional reinforcements as needed. Even a B-52 strike could be called for if needed. The assault begins with a 5-minute artillery preparation from a battery of 3 105mm howitzers. At the end of this barrage, a white phosphorus round is fired. This is the signal to the Cobra helicopters to begin the attack. There were usually 2 Cobra helicopters supporting an assault. They came in and sprayed the perimeter with rockets and minigun fire, and remained circling overhead to support the landing. The Cobra is a formidable weapon. The pilot sits in the rear seat, slightly elevated above the gunner in the front. The weapon carried 38 rockets, and the minigun could fire 4,000 rounds a minute. This is the door gunner's view of an assault. There was a door gunner on either side of the Huey, carrying M60 machine guns capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. Flying on a combat assault was the only time we ever cooled off from the average 105 to 115 degree heat. Sweat dried and we sucked in deep breaths of cold air. But the relief was only temporary. 5 minutes before landing, each man would fire a short burst out the door to make sure his weapon was functioning properly. I always made sure that I had the most firepower on the first helicopter, including my machine gunner, grenadier, medic, squad leader, and radio operator. It was the radio operator's job to immediately notify the battalion commander circling overhead if the LZ was hot or cold. The men on the first helicopters were always in great danger. They wanted to get off the birds as fast as possible and to get to cover. The pilot, too, wanted to pull pitch and get back into the sky for safety. So the men would ride the skids and jump from 10 to 15 feet off of the ground, sometimes falling and resulting in injury. If a helicopter was shot down, the men who survived the crash had to fight it out on their own until their unit could be relieved. Additional helicopters would not be placed at risk when the LZ was hot. If the landing was not contested, patrols were sent out to search for enemy dead and wounded. If they were able to engage, a firefight would ensue, and the entire company would move to attack. In deep jungle, Cobras flying overhead could not see your position on the ground. When calling for artillery support, I made adjustments, lying flat and listening to where the rounds landed, and praying they were not too close. Night firefights were the worst. The VC and NVA owned the night. They would try to penetrate our positions, sending in sappers with satchel charges, trying to destroy the command bunker. It was fearsome and impossible to know what was going on. I never wanted to risk my men's lives, but sometimes a firefight resulted in casualties and death. This photo was taken on my first worst day in Vietnam, the day I lost my first man killed in action. It was my responsibility to fill out a death card, attach it to a boot along with his dog tag, wrap a poncho around him, and load the body on a helicopter for the long, sad journey home. There would be more men wrapped in ponchos during my tour, but this was my first.
So sorry about, there's a little bit of repetition there, but I used the videos in different scenarios. So as I mentioned, this was my view on more than 50 helicopter combat assaults. And there were a few occasions when I would get a radio call saying, find a landing zone. We've got helicopters coming in. And sometimes I'd get a briefing en route. Sometimes I would position myself right next in between the pilot and co-pilot. And they would, sometimes I would have a headset, and sometimes I'd get a briefing to know a little bit about what I was going into, but you always expected the worst. As I mentioned in the video, there was this barrage from the 105mm howitzer battery that supported the landing. And you would think that there would be absolutely no way that any enemy soldier could survive that barrage. It was just fearsome. And then the last round that they fired was a white phosphorus round, and then that brought in the helicopter, Cobra helicopters, and they would spray minigun fire all around the perimeter Again, how anybody could survive that is just unknown. It's a formidable weapon with rockets and miniguns, and they remained overhead. They remained on station after we landed. If we got into trouble, they would be there to assist us. Door gunners, at least on the first bird, were always spraying the perimeter as we came in for a landing. The NVA and the Viet Cong had a policy or a typical plan, not of shooting down the first helicopter, but shooting down the second helicopter. And once that helicopter crashed on the ground, then, you know, the rest of the helicopters would not, that were in the assault, would not be brought in. They would be diverted to an alternate landing zone, and the rest of the company would have to come by foot to try to support the men who were left. And how they were able, how the North Vietnamese army was able to survive all of that firepower, I do not know, but on occasion they did. It was mentioned that the men wanted to get off that helicopter, the first couple of helicopters, just as fast as possible. They would jump, and it was not uncommon after an assault to have to medevac 2 or 3 men who had banged up their legs or their knees or sprained ankles. Most of my time was spent in I Corps patrolling the demilitarized zone and attempting to inhibit penetration from the North Vietnamese army down the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos and into South Vietnam. That area is mountainous territory and 3 canopy jungle. That means that there are 3 levels of growth over your head. I mentioned before that we're strung out on a long line. It's the most dangerous formation that you could have. Point man is out 50 meters in front with the cover man, and heat exhaustion and heat stroke was a real concern and very dangerous. And if a man was wounded, if he hit a booby trap of one sort or another, it was very, very difficult to medevac them. And the only solution was the jungle penetrator. We could give our position on the map coordinates to the helicopter pilot, but once they were in the area, they're looking down, all they can see is green. So we would cut down trees to open up a hole in the canopy, maybe 10 to 12 feet across. And we had these star clusters that was a little bit like a Roman candle. And we'd shoot it through the hole in the canopy and hope that they would spot it. And then they knew pretty much where we were. We could tie a smoke grenade to the end of a long pole and hold it up in that hole so that the smoke would go through, and then they could come in and drop the hook to help to save the man. Now, water was at a premium. Every man carried approximately 2 gallons of water, and it was not uncommon to drink that much water by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you had to kind of gut it out until the evening time when they would bring in a helicopter and bring in water. We were not allowed to drink water from the streams because of Agent Orange poisoning. This is what it looks like to bring in a helicopter and land. You give the signals to the pilot as to where you wanted him to land. Now, I did 3 things that I think helped me survive my tour, that allowed me to be that one officer out of 4 who, although I was wounded on 2 occasions, my wounds were not terribly severe. And I was able to complete 7 months in the field. But I did 3 things that I think really helped me to survive my tour. The first thing was that I sat down with my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders. And I said to them that, listen, you have been in the field longer than I. You're more experienced than I. I'm still the leader. But if you see me doing something wrong, I want you to speak up and tell me. I may not always agree with you, But if you see me doing something wrong, I want you to tell me about it. And we wore no insignia, no patches, no saluting. They never called me sir. We were referred to each other by nicknames. For example, my machine gunner was Cowboy, or by numbers. My call sign was Foggy Day 16. So most of the men called me either LT or 16. My radio operator was 16 Romeo. My platoon sergeant was 15. The first squad leader was 11. So one of the problems I have is I have a number of men who are on the Vietnam Memorial, but I don't know their names because I only knew their number or I knew their nickname. So the second thing I did that helped me survive, I believe, was that I tried very, very hard not to do stupid stuff. Now, that may sound funny, but it was really easy to do stupid stuff. For example, I had a fellow officer who was bringing in a helicopter, very much like this picture right here, and he did so by standing on top of a hill. And when the helicopter landed, the rotor blades took his head off. That's an example. Then the third thing I did that helped me survive my tour was I listened to my point man and I trusted my point man. They're out in front of the unit 50 meters, well, along with the cover man. And they're the ones who get killed first. They're the ones who discover the booby traps. They're the ones who discover the ambush beforehand. And it was not uncommon for the point man to call me forward and to say to me, I feel uncomfortable about where we're walking. I don't hear any birds. I don't hear any monkeys chirping. And I trusted their instincts. And what I would do is fire artillery out in front of our position. We called it reconnaissance by fire. And I shot so much artillery that ultimately the battery that supported us put a budget of 25 rounds on me. I couldn't shoot more than 25 rounds, but that was enough to make my men feel more comfortable about walking through a strange area. And a number of times it would help us to avoid an ambush. This is what it was like out toward the Gulf of Tonkin along the demilitarized zone. There was no overhead cover, brutally hot. We would hole up around 11:30 in the morning until maybe 1:30 in the afternoon, the hottest time of the day. All right. So after 7 months in the field, I rotated back and was, as I had hoped, scheduled to become the new personnel officer, the S1 of the unit. And I was understudying, they call it on-the-job training, the current S1. And on about the third day, he came to me and he said, "Did you apply for a job at division headquarters?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I've got orders here telling me to send you back to division forward at Camp Evans." This is a picture of Camp Evans. It's a base camp of the division forward, roughly 12,000 men. And you're supposed to go to the 14th MHD for an interview. And I said, "Well, that's interesting. What's the 14th MHD?" He said, "I have no idea. Go get on a helicopter and find out." So I got on a helicopter and I flew to Camp Evans. And I started asking around if anybody knew what the 14th MHD was. And finally, I found a soldier who said, "I think it's down that trail, down that road, about a mile." So I walked down the road and I came to the 14th Military History Detachment. The motto of this unit was, "You fight it, we write it." And I was interviewed by a captain who had gone through the personnel files of every officer in the division, every junior officer in the division, looking for somebody who had either communication skills or journalism, and my degree was in comparative literature. So he told me about what the job entailed, and I looked around the office, which was a tent, and they had fans, they had cots to sleep on, they had a refrigerator, they had cold Coke and beer in the refrigerator, they had a television set, and off the back, they had a shower. I was offered the job and I took it. So for the last 5 months of my tour, I worked in this detachment, and on a quarterly basis, we were responsible for writing a division report that was distributed to 18 different sections of the Army. And each of the battalions in the 1st Cav Division contributed to the report. There was a specific format, and then I would edit the reports and pull it all together. And then our clerk typists would type it up. And of course, we had no Xerox machines. And so the most you could get out of carbon paper was 6 copies. So we had to retype this report 3 times in order to come up with the 18 copies that needed to be distributed. The other responsibility of this unit was to attend the division briefing every night, and with the commanding general and the general staff. And if the Cav was involved in a major operation, in a major battle, usually 2 to 3 days in length, and often those battles were at night, I must add. That's when the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong were the most successful. And I mean, they played their cards right. They knew they were superior night fighters to Americans. And that's when these major battles would often occur. Because during the day, if they attacked us, we had such superior firepower, we could always overcome any assault. But at nighttime, it was a different story. So it was not uncommon for the G3, that's the operations officer, who's a full colonel in the 1st Cav Division, to say, is the representative from the 14th Military History Detachment here? And I would stand up and say, yes, sir. He said, well, I want you to fly out to the company tomorrow. And in this one particular case, we had a company of about 120 men that was semi-decimated by the North Vietnamese Army. They had, out of 120, they had 80 wounded and killed. And he said, I want you to go out, interview the men who are still alive, and write up the battle and figure out what happened. And it really was a little bit like putting a puzzle together, because most of these actions occurred at night, and it was extremely difficult to figure out what had happened. So I interviewed the captain of this decimated unit, and for about 2 hours, and took detailed notes. I had a sergeant who was with me. He went out and talked to some of the soldiers who still were not wounded, and we would even go to the medevac area to talk to any slightly wounded men too, to get their opinions and try to piece together this whole puzzle. And what had happened in this particular engagement is that we knew that we had killed hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers, but as they left the battle scene, they took all their dead and wounded with them. Plenty of blood trails, but no bodies. And at that time, American battles were evaluated on the metric of body count. And so in my report, I put down the fact that we knew we had killed hundreds of North Vietnamese, but that we had no body count to report. And the G3, the operations officer who reviewed my report, threw it back at me and said, change this report. It's absolutely wrong. The company commander is to be held fully responsible for placing his unit at risk, and failure to follow the orders of the battalion commander, who was flying overhead in a helicopter trying to direct the battle, and put in that we killed 465 enemy soldiers. Again, body count was the metric. So after about a month in Camp Evans, which at that time was the division forward. We moved down to 3 Corps to another base camp called Phuc Vinh, just north of Saigon. And it was a very safe and secure area for the most part, although we received rocket and mortar attacks on a pretty regular basis. We built bunkers right next to our Quonset hut and cut a hole through the wall so that if we were rocketed, we would just hit the ground and crawl through the hole in the wall and into a safe bunker. After 11 months in the field, an officer fills out a form called a dream sheet, and you put down where you would like to be assigned. And I said I'd like to be assigned to the West Coast of the United States. So that meant Fort Ord, California, or Fort Lewis, Washington. Those are the 2 likely places that I would be assigned. And I didn't get orders, and I didn't get orders. And I finally talked my boss into letting me go to Saigon, to MACV headquarters, that's Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV, to find out what my orders were. So after 2 days of doing some sightseeing, having some great food, and having a great time in Saigon, I said, well, I guess I better find out what my orders were. And I was ushered into MACV headquarters and into a gymnasium, an actual gymnasium with the basketball hoops pulled up. And on the floor of this gymnasium were these low wooden trays. And the computer processing at that time was Fortran computer processing. And it was punch cards. And each card was a soldier in Vietnam. So there were 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam at that point in time. We went down the line, A to B to BA to BAR to Bartlett Peter, Bartlett John, Bartlett Robin. Pulled my card and said, oh, you're going to Seattle, Washington. And I said, oh, Fort Lewis. And they said, no, it says here, Fort Wainwright. And I'm saying, wait a minute, I went to high school. One of my high schools was in Seattle, Washington. There is no Fort Wainwright in Seattle, Washington. So we had to go get a directory. This is before computers, of course. We had to get a directory, and we looked up Fort Wainwright is in Fairbanks, Alaska. So I got the West Coast. Before moving down from I Corps to 2 Corps to 3 Corps, which is the second base camp that we were at. The office that was directly across the road from ours was the Public Information Office. And before we packed up, we were getting rid of all non-essential things. And the Public Information Office had all these photographs, most of which you've seen here, and some combat art. And I went over, and they were in a big pile. And they said, what are you going to do with these? And they said, we're going to burn them. And I said, well, can I have anything I want? And they said, sure, help yourself. So I brought back 3 binders worth of photographs and combat art. Now, you've seen this picture a couple of times. This is my first worst day in Vietnam, and I had this picture taken of me so I would never forget that day. And the one thing I wanted to mention is that this card, this death card that our medic would give me, first of all, my men would bring the body back to me, and then they would skedaddle. They did not want to be a part of what had to happen with a dead soldier. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe they thought they'd be next, but this was my job. And I had to go through the pockets, make sure there was nothing there that shouldn't be there. And personal effects went into a plastic bag, placed on the man's chest. And the medic would give me this death card, which was nothing more than a 3x5 card with a hole in it and a piece of string tied. But for the first time, the Army was really trying to capture the map coordinates where this soldier was killed. And I thought that was unusual, and they were really trying to pinpoint as best as possible where the soldier was killed and keep a record of it. We didn't have body bags, so we would wrap the man in the poncho, and we had to be very concerned about rotor wash. When the helicopters came in, they would drop off ammunition and water and sea rations, and then we would load the dead onto the helicopter to go back. We had to be very concerned about rotor wash. You didn't want this poncho coming loose and going up into the rotor blades. So I carried a ball of twine with me, and I would tie it off around the top and around the waist and around the boots, just so that the poncho would not flap in the breeze. And that was a very, very traumatic period of time. And I did have to put, I didn't keep count, but I put a lot of men into ponchos. This is just a final quick video. It starts slowly.
The trail. The trail is only a meter wide and weaves its way through thick green and brown underbrush, so overgrown that even a jackrabbit would have trouble threading its way. Large thorny limbs form a matted barrier as you strain, push, shove, and bleed to get through. Wait-a-minute vines seem to take special pleasure in tripping you, spraining your ankle, causing you to swear. With each conquering, a new thicket presents itself, as though to say, "You made it through that one, now try me." As the trail wears on, your sore muscles, aching feet and back, cry out for relief from a 40-pound pack filled with sea rations, ammunition, canteens, and combat equipment. 10-minute breaks ease the pain for a short while, and then you're numb again. Rest is a beautiful dream. You must conserve water, so you sip sweet mouthfuls, allowing it to run slowly down your cotton, dry throat. If you stop sweating, the dirt cakes on your arms and face, and you can't spare the water to wash it off. It's time to push on, waddling like a pregnant woman. The trail is a struggle between mind and body. The two fight every step, clawing a trough, your brain forcing you on. Your mind is filled with thoughts, home, cold beer, women, but ever alert for any noise, any false movement, anything out of the ordinary along the trail. There are so many things to remember. Keep alert, stay alive. You must kill him first. You must pull the trigger first, and you must be fast. But the trail pulls you down. Eyes droop, sweat drips into them, the salt burning and stinging. Dirty hands rub the tears away, and nails, bitten to the quick, scratch the mosquito bites from the night before. Alert, alert. Keep your head up, breathe deep. Don't think about home. Don't think about anything except staying alive. Forget the pain, the aching muscles, the tired feet. Clear your mind. Protect your life. Don't let the trail win. The perspiration runs in big dirty drops off the stock of your M16 rifle. Your hands push the thorns aside. You work your body through, but your pack catches. You pull. Thorns cut across your shoulders. Damn! But keep following that little green trail. Keep pushing. Keep pushing. Feet obeying a harsh command. Listen. Alert. The jungle is quiet, and only an occasional monkey screams out, making you jump and duck. You follow the trail by feel, toes pointing forward, searching for vines and roots. Your eyes scan to the front, watching for movement. Ears strain like radar, listening for the click of a safety being released. Their weapons sound like popcorn exploding. Listen.
Or popcorn. I think that last little piece didn't carry over, but two interesting things there. One was the 40-pound pack. I've had other soldiers remark at the end of that video that, wait a minute, my pack weighed 70 pounds. Where do you get off with 40? And that was one of the big advantages of being in the Cav, that we were able to have lighter weight packs. This last slide shows the code words that I want to leave you with. And that is the importance of the words welcome home for Vietnam veterans. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying thank you for your service. It's a fine thing to do. But you know, many Vietnam veterans were not welcomed home. It was not uncommon for men to come into Travis Air Force Base and put their uniforms on and go into the city and be harassed and spit upon and called baby killers. I mean, I've talked to soldiers that I threw my uniform away. I didn't want to be harassed. I was fortunate in that my parents actually met me, and I avoided any kind of confrontation with protesters. But American veterans were not welcomed home. And so my request to you is that if you meet a Vietnam veteran, and you know, we're walking in the boots of Korean and World War II veterans these days. We're the ones who are in the majority, but not for long. And try saying welcome home and watch the reaction. It just demonstrates that you understand our sacrifice, the sacrifice that we made, and you have an affinity for that sacrifice. And it's just much more meaningful than thank you for your service. I'll end with yes. I'll end with one final story, and that is you saw some of the artwork that I brought back from my tour in Vietnam, and I had occasion to play that last video. I'm the president of the New York, New Jersey chapter of the 1st Cav Division Association, and I had occasion to play that video for some soldiers. And there was a veteran service officer in the audience, and he said, "Gee, I think I know the artist who drew this this picture." And I said, "Oh, that's neat." And I didn't think too much of it. He said, "Well, I'm going to give him your name." And lo and behold, about 2 or 3 weeks later, I was driving out to the University of Scranton to visit my son, and I get this phone call on my cell phone. And he says, "Hi, this is Jerry Johnson. I understand you've used my artwork in your video." And I went, uh-oh. Well, I did know that artwork and photography done by combat artists and combat photographers is in the public domain during military times. But at the same time, I was a little nervous that that I had used his artwork without permission. Anyway, he said, "I haven't seen the video. Where is it?" So I gave him the URL, and I said, "Well, let me pull off the road and I'll give you a call back." And I did. I got some gas and pulled over to the side of the road, and I called him back, and we had a nice chat. And he said to me, "I'm so proud to be in your video. You really have done a beautiful job, and I'm very, very pleased that you did so." And we chatted and we talked. And at the end of that conversation, he said to me, "Welcome home." And that was the first time, and that happened about 20 years ago. That was the first time that anybody had said welcome home to me. So I leave you with those code words for the future. Try it. It's a game changer. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry, it's very loud in my office right now. I appreciate. I think what an absolute fantastic job, and wonderfully thorough, like how everything went down. But knowing something like saying "welcome home" makes that much of a difference. That's just wonderful to know now, and wish would have known sooner. I think everyone here else would say the same. Thank you so much, sir, for everything you said. You're more than welcome to stay on. With some of our members, we just have to hit a few more things in our Action 360. Make sure everybody knows as we keep trying to continuing on and helping not just veterans, but also active military. And with that said, Raymond, what do you have for us with the USA?
A quick recap for everybody. So June 10th is the board meeting. Everyone is invited. June 19th is the kickout installation dinner that we have every year. It's in Dejas, 6 p.m. If you're going to be there, please send me an email so I can RSVP for you. We had some great movement on the Marine Corps dinner on November 10th. We have booked our speaker, will be Colonel G. Sean Matroka. He's retired USMC. Also, we booked entertainment. And that will be the dinner show will be a Andrew Sisters tribute group, and they will do a 45-minute dinner show. And we also plugged in the servers and the cleanup for that day, which will be the Foothill chapter of the Order of Demolay. So that went way far ahead. The food drive on 9/28, I just spoke to Jim Zenner from the LA County Department of Military and Veteran Affairs. They're going to take lead on contacting Fort Irwin. They want to take lead on doing some stuff with the flyer, and so they're working with us on that. And so everything's coming along really well. And this is the end of the Rotary year, so there are no more meetings. Next meeting is in June, and we have great speakers already lined up, but we're way over. So I'll just turn it back over to you, Don.
Well, thank you so much. And like I said, thank you so much, sir, for everything you said. We really appreciate it. It gives a way bigger in depth of everything that was going on over there. Good to see you, Glenn. I don't like to steal anyone's time more than I need to. So thank you so much for everyone being out there today. Thank you, sir, for everything you said. And I will see you guys soon.